Welcome, everyone, to another episode. And I'm very excited today to be with Mitch. And Mitch is an orgone researcher and a man of my own heart. He's been working very, very hard for years developing different orgone devices to help us battle this overwhelming EMF environment we find ourselves in. And so I just wanted to say thank you, Mitch, for joining me. And I'm excited to have a conversation today.
And let me be first to say thank you for having me. And yeah, we had a short preliminary conversation before to kind of gauge different things we talk about and what I can bring to the table as far as for you and any of your listeners. And so I'm looking forward to it. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think on a very entry level, we'll start here, kind of for folks that don't know, I know this is a long history, but for folks that don't know, maybe let's start with what orgone actually is,
Mhm.
and kind of how we can utilize it to our advantage in this current environment.
Sure. Quick, a huge disclaimer, quick disclaimer. We obviously will have a conversation today. Everything I refer to, uh, as time has gone on and more stuff has come to light, the more you learn, the less you know.
Mhm.
And so, as I've done this work for about 8 years, we'll have a conversation where I might reference, like, here's what we'd have talked about 8 years ago. Here's what we'd have talked about that short time, maybe the current convid timeline, and what we would talk about today or how I would refer to things. So, to get started, in a nutshell, orgone, when people hear that term, orgone is referring to an energy form. It's referring to what I would call it life energy. Many people would call it life energy,
Mhm.
but cultures that would call it chi or prana. Essentially, there is a waveform of energy, like consciousness energy, that flows throughout the universe. That's a loaded word now, I guess, for some people. So I try to say like reality, realm, realm world, whatever. But it's this idea is that there is this life energy that's like the spark that gives everything what it is. It flows through the universe or through reality organically. It keeps things in a process of life. It's essentially life energy. And so that's where a lot of cultures that have called things chi or prana. Um, I I can't remember if it's in Russia, like they used the term tachyon.
Mhm.
Um, and in Star Wars they call it the Force. That's essentially what it is. I think there's actually some truth bombs in that whole whatever you call it, pantheon of that universe. But it is this life energy that keeps everything in balance, or it is like the natural process. And there are ways that you can create devices that harness it or that will help to sort of reestablish that energy flow in areas that have maybe been intentionally shut off from that energy. And so, for anyone who might say, well, what does that mean? There is an energy that flows through people. And I know we as humans, there's probably a lot of people who will listen to this who will understand like the concepts of things like aura or the third eye or the chakras. And I'm not here to debate whether like what's real and what's not about, the calcification of this or whatever. But when you dissect the energy of the universe and essentially that famous quote that we credit Nikola Tesla for it, that says, in order to understand the universe, one simply needs to understand energy, frequency, and vibration. So, this energy or this frequency that passes through everything, we have basically we're antenna. We
Mhm.
are just a cosmic or interdimensional antenna that has these receptors and things like DNA. Whether or not that goes into things like aura or chakra, like I look at an aura as your energetic biofield.
Mhm.
And that field, as you get into the work of the orgone research or Organite, and specifically like Wilhelm Reich, which is the scientific component, the backstory and the history, when you want to lump this in with, go into the physics realm of this and not just metaphysics, then it's like you are basically, we have this ability for this energy to pass through everything natural and to keep everything in alignment. That's a big word these days, alignment, having things in alignment or having things in nature. And then that we live in this world that seems to be creating a bunch of artificial stuff and sort of overshadowing or creating an overcast or an overlay of this artificial realm, a synthetic realm. Some people call it synthetic biology. Um, it can be something as, I'm going to jump straight into a dirty word here that we'll talk about throughout the conversation, but chemtrails,
Mhm.
geoengineering, covering the sky,
Mhm.
clot shots, the things that affect our DNA, the things that affect our receptors, the things that affect our connection to whatever you want to call this source of creation. Some call it God, some call it source. Um, I feel like we're at a kind of a pivotal point right now where it's never been more confusing,
Yeah.
especially at the acceleration rate. It's almost, if you just look at the universe and you look at it from this perspective that everything that is and everything that happens, the reasoning behind it is energy. And it's whether that's being created or destroyed or manipulated or transmuted or used to create something and destroy something else or replace something else. When you look at it like that, then all of a sudden you start answering a lot of questions about most complex things we've been trying to decode, like ancient civilizations and
Right.
architectures and energy points and generators and ley lines and all that, or even the tangible stuff that's more down to earth, like why decisions are made in the government and why people are influenced on a certain wavelength throughout this age or that age, like a golden age or a dark age. I mean, I'm whatever. I'm not going to debate the I know like we're at a point that's so confusing, and I think the truther movement, where we talked about this in our preliminary talk,
Yeah.
that I said, the more you learn, the less you know, and we're getting to this point where I think there were so many truthers or truth seekers in the cooks in the kitchen, and nobody is preparing a damn meal. It's just like talking, 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 and
Right.
so now it's just never been more confusing. So in order just to bring it down tangibly to a simpler concept, if you look at everything in this reality as a flow of energy or the purpose behind it is a frequency or energy or vibration, then those things will begin to sort of fall into place and you can start to put together that puzzle. So,
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. And I think one of the important things with orgone and understanding this is all these disparate things that seem disconnected. So it seems like there's an immense amount of weight with these things. Everyone's worried about EMF or smart meters or cell phone towers or chemtrails or whatever. But
mhm,
understanding orgone in this way and energy in this way, we can start to see sort of the connection between them, but we can also start to say, hey, maybe there's a solution to this, and this
mhm,
is kind of through the orgone. So could you talk about that a little bit, how orgone sort of helps with, let's say, EMF and that kind of stuff,
mhm.
Brent?
Yeah. Well, so when I first noticed something was wrong in the sky, and I mean,
Hmm.
we all kind of did. I think,
Right.
even for me, I feel like a late bloomer, and it was probably around 2012,
Mhm.
uh, that it was one of those things just becomes so noticeable. You're like, wait a second, and you kind of glitch out from the system, and you're just like, hang on, pump the brake.
Yeah.
And so, as I was learning about geoengineering, I could learn about physical components of things, but
Hmm.
it wasn't until the day I had heard about this hockey puck device, and this was very limited information back in 2000, about 2015.
Right.
I had learned about this little hockey puck device, the thing we call a tower buster,
Mhm.
used to bust the frequency of a tower or an EMF source. Um, and it was in learning that and being like, well, what does this have to do with anything going on in the sky? And then as time progressed and I started experimenting with these devices and on a deep level, because I just went full throttle with it and living the lifestyle I had, I answered to nobody. And I was just like, I'm gonna either be a spearhead in this or I'm gonna prove it wrong. And
Mhm.
basically what I was trying to prove wrong was that this idea that something on the ground, and in this case, it was the EMF devices and cell towers and this whole network that was being built sort of under our noses this whole time, uh, had something to do with the thing in the sky. And that if you kind of look through the progression of like the last 50 years or so, it's actually the stuff that we see in the sky, and I'll go into my strong opinions about that as the
Hmm.
conversation goes on and why I don't agree with what everyone else seems to be saying these days, what it is or what they think it is. But that progression has gotten it's intensified.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that in the last 3 or 4 years, it's severely intensified. And there's a reason for that because the 5G network was released or I should say like activated and really just went full throttle to, you know, build the Borg over this realm and creating this frequency web.
Hmm.
And so as I jumped into it, I was sort of reverse engineering the ideas I had about geoengineering, where I was able to plug in answers. Like I started looking at, I mean, I was plugging in answers to questions that didn't make sense when I was reading about a patent and I was reading about a project the government did. And because I'm like, okay, so they're spraying this thing in the sky, is what we are led to believe.
Right.
And they do these things during certain operations, like in Vietnam. They did things to Cuba, to their sugar crop, and it's like there are these different instances in history. You can pull this information, Freedom of Information Act, which I think is kind of funny, but whatever. It's learning those things did not answer the questions of why the activity in the sky increased during certain astrological events, why it
Hmm.
increased and was very strategic and weird around full moons and new moons.
Yeah.
And as I was learning about all this energy stuff, and I got very deep, I should say, in the early portion of my journey with this, I got very sucked into a new age mindset because
Hmm.
for anyone new to this concept of orgone or organite, it this is I think this is actually a psyop. I'll just say it. It's kind of a harsh thing some people don't like, but there's a reason this was always lumped together with the new age because it would never be, or it was in a way to control it being taken seriously from a physics component and how it falls into all these laws of physics that then begin breaking down and then begin making you analyze like what's going on about these things in the sky that are breaking every law of physics in the book. And these instances of, when you learn about a culture that does things like sun gazing, and they talk about those prime time moments each morning and evening that we need to be looking, it has to do with the type of light and the UV and just whatever the angle is. But there's all this information that points to this activity known as sun gazing and what it does to the body and what it helps with the circadian rhythm and detoxing and all these things. And that might sound weird to some people, but that light spectrum, there's something about it. Well, it's I've been saying this now for pretty much the whole time I've been doing this work. It's been about 8 years now, and whatever this thing is that is causing this havoc and doing this part of this agenda, it blocks the sunrise and the sunset nearly 100% of the time,
Yeah.
no matter where you are on planet Earth. And I think to myself, now that's a very selective poison. And I wonder why, when we see tic-tac-toe lines in the sky, or like I can I can say, because I've been documenting the sky. I try to document the sky every day at least a few times. And I
Hmm.
have this catalog and I put some things together last month during all the hurricane
Yeah.
debauchery, and put together a video sort of trying to tell a story that I have collected over the years and the progression of what I call the frequency fence.
Hmm.
And the frequency fence is essentially a expansion of all of the EMF technology, whether it's a cell tower down the street or on top of a mountain, or one of those big ball things people see, or that all those pictures that circulate out in the ocean, or the cell phone that's in your pocket, or the Apple Watch on your wrist. All of these things are collectively emitting this bubble. And within this bubble is when you start messing with essentially the laws of physics, you're messing with things on an etheric level. And this is where it gets weird, which is why I think, as I was on my tangent about the new age stuff, is that that's part of why I think it was always kind of lumped in there early on. It's the idea that, oh, this stuff will put some organite around your house and it'll help your juju space. But in
Mhm.
reality, it's you want to put this stuff around your house to change the frequency of everything unnatural that's continually being manipulated around you. And it's sort of like, there's reasons we have phrases like be careful what you wish for.
Mhm.
And most people probably listening to this have, at least, if not fully, they at least partially understand the concepts of manifestation, thoughts become things. Um, there's a reason for all those things. Now, it's not as simplistic, I think, as you don't wish for the lottery numbers and get it just because you have a high vibe tribe. That's not how this works. And
Right.
I can go into tangents about that. I have to be careful, but the idea is that something manipulates frequency, and frequency turns into physical matter, and we are living in a physical realm that is manifesting all of these things that, in the case of the chemtrail in the sky, what we see, we can say we see something and what appears to be a plane, and it appears to have something coming out the back of it, and it appears, it's like it appears like it appears like it appears like, but
Mhm.
we don't have any definitive tests. And over 8 years of doing this work, what I have sort of come to learn is that I don't know. I've never found anyone that actually knows what chemtrails are, including myself. We
Yeah.
don't know who's doing it, why they're doing it, what they're doing, or how they're doing it.
Mhm.
Where's this stuff come from? Where do these planes take off? Because we've also, there's no shortage of people out there who have seen quite a few sky anomalies. They've
Yeah.
seen patterns. They've seen it's the thing. Like I can tell you from documenting the sky every day. I can assure you. Oh, sorry. Sorry, the thing just popped for a second. I don't know what
Oh,
that was
yeah.
saying. It says this meeting's being recorded, um, which I thought. But anyway, when you look at all of the things these people are doing and what's behind it, and I was going to say parasites, I call them parasites. And this is something that goes back to like Wilhelm Reich's work. He's the father of orgonomy, and like the reason we have that term orgone. It's this idea that there's something feeding on this realm, whether this realm was created this way or whether this realm is a natural realm that was perhaps hijacked. Um, it, there's a lot of debates there, and that's what's making it harder and harder to have conversations these days. Because anyone who's been paying attention in the truth community probably has noticed people either tend to think this place is a playground, or they think it's a prison, and there is in between, and there's also outside of, but like those tend to be the general people butting heads and going to war with each other right now.
Yeah.
So regardless of what it is, I look at this place and the mechanistic components and how it operates. So I can tell you, like actually today when we're recording this
Mhm.
this is a last quarter moon tomorrow, and
Mhm.
I've just noticed this for about the last 2 years that last quarter moons, it's always about 24 to 48 hours before that point. At least this is based on the Gregorian calendar, but 24 to 48 hours before that, there's an increase in chemtrail activity.
Mm.
And so for when people, it's those types of things, or when the solar eclipses, if there's a comet going, if NASA's saying something, SpaceX is saying something, or even like just for anyone confused, like, well, what are you saying as far as like the energy in the sky and what those are affected by?
Mhm.
I'm over here documenting things and looking at everything from an energetic component that I can say it was really interesting that when we had the first presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it was the day after that all of the I think it was almost all of the continental United States had this really crappy heat wave. And it got very, very hot, and it stayed hot until the Sunday that Biden announced that he was not going to be running again. And there was this weird energy shift. And doing now that doesn't really answer a lot. That
Mhm.
goes in the coincidence pile. And this is
Mhm.
years and years of coincidences where, you know, I say I got into this to prove it wrong, and I have yet to be able to prove it wrong. I've only ever been pleasantly surprised. Well,
Right.
what is it Mitch is saying he's surprised at? Well, for those new to this, it's like the tower component and the EMF component and the Organite component is that when you start putting things like Organite around all of the uh, with why does it have to align with these astrological events and things, or holidays, or and doing what I do, I get hundreds of emails a week. I mean, even I mean, and whenever there's things like hurricanes, like in October, I mean, I spent most
Mhm.
of October. I mentioned this to you on the phone. It's
Yeah.
my October was spent on the phone, teaching people how to make chem busters, the giant, the huge organite contraptions
Mhm.
that are like lawn ornaments that they look like bazookas. They're etheric bazookas, or I call them quantum or multidimensional bazookas
Mhm.
that help clean up the atmosphere, and they help pop holes in that energy bubble that's being created up there to make the chemtrails work in the first place. So when those things happen, I get this feedback from people really all over the world, from putting myself out there in this aspect. And the stories I hear are so bizarre and consistent. They're bizarre and unique, but yet consistent in the way they're bizarre, because you can find patterns in all these other things going on that are used around the world to generate hate and fear and confusion and all of that stuff, that you start to develop a pattern, and you realize, wow, like there is some greater force that's conducting all of this stuff. And, I would recommend, aside from our conversation today, people can, of course, go to my website where I have a library of endless, information and interviews and all kinds of things. But there was a particular conversation I did this year on the Terrain Theory podcast where it was the first time I had mentioned this aspect. I said, I think most people look at geoengineering as an agenda in and of itself, and it's not. It's a it's a component or a byproduct or a symptom of a much more grandiose agenda. And that is the thing I have sort of deconstructed and reverse engineered my whole philosophy in like, what is this thing that's going on in the sky? And also, I have to say too, like, to anyone who, I can hear the voices out there and they're saying like, well, I've read the patents, I've read this, the government said this, it's this and this and this and this.
Right.
And I always have to remind them, we live in a world where if I ask these same people, so you believe what the CDC tells you about COVID, or what FDA tells you about what's healthy and what's not healthy to eat, or
Mhm.
you believe NASA and what's beyond this realm, or whether we've actually gone to the moon, or any of that, or what's the 9/11 commission report. Like, it's like, do
Right.
you believe these entities? Because if you believe these people, or if you don't believe them, I should say, and most of the time, anyone I'm affiliated with, or any stories I hear from people, of course they know better, because we've always been lied to about this realm.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, well, I would let you know that the US Patent and Trademark Office is part of that same system
Mhm.
of parasites. So you have to really put on your critical and analytical thinking cap and think, not only what is it that we know and what is it that we learn, but in a world like this that's so deceptive, why are we allowed to know it? Why is this allowed to come to the surface? Why is this particular idea being pushed? And these are things I've been preparing for this since about 2018, when I still was getting into all this for only a couple years and everything was comfortable. Um, but I knew someday the day would come. I'm like, they've got tricks to make sure people are minimized in their understanding of just how big this reality can get,
Yeah.
and they limit the thinking. So most people are on this kick, especially right now, that the enemy is a physical enemy spraying physical poison in the sky. It's your government. It can be voted away. I mean, the other day I saw someone on Instagram posting a video about chemtrails in Tennessee, and they said, "Oh, well, we banned chemtrails. They voted to ban it or something." And they're like, "No chemtrails." And of course, they showed an aerial view, and I looked at it, and I'm like, those are chemtrails,
Right.
and I can tell where they're coming from. I could pinpoint where this person, based on where they lived. I could pinpoint most likely where the towers were based on the radiated lines in the sky. They look like the grill marks. I have been able to pinpoint what's hiding out in the forest or out in the desert, at least in my case, and how these things ping each other. And then I reposted it, and I just kind of put out a questionnaire, and it was just like, nothing's been banned. That was a deception to make people think, if they don't see chemtrails, that like, oh, your leaders love you. But then I got a flood of emails from Tennessee, from folks in Tennessee, that were like, I got a video here that proves otherwise. And I'm like, yeah. And it was in big places like Nashville and Knoxville, and I'm trying to think, Memphis, and I'm just like, okay, well, that's Tennessee, and it's like, I'm over here kind of like reminding people, if you think the government's going to stop itself from doing something to itself, um, that's never going to happen.
Right.
And the reason they want you to think that is because, as long as you're fixated on those ideas, you don't get into the more grandiose concepts like thoughts become things, and this reality is bigger, and just that pyramid goes up and up and up and up. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to shut up now
Nice.
and let you talk while I find a couple of photographs and
Yeah, cool.
things
Yeah,
of
some photographs
devices.
of the devices would be really cool. And I think for
Yeah.
me as a physician, um, several things can be true at once. And so what I find clinically with people is 90% of the people that I've worked with and we've done our diagnostics on in the last 5 years have aluminum in their lungs. And when you take a spectrometer and you go outside at the certain times of day, the wavelengths of normal sunlight are not there. And it seems like they've been able to knock out very specific wavelengths. Coincidentally, the ones that we use for healing and regenerating our own bodies are magically gone most of the time. Um,
Mhm.
so those two things I know are true, but then also just logically thinking about this, I'm totally with you on the fact that it's not just aluminum and silver and barium that they're spraying. And there is a distinct relationship between what's going on the ground and what's going on in the air. Because when I started using all your stuff and taking this seriously, um, several things that, I'm sure thousands of people have told you is we have a section of our community that seems sort of, I don't want to use this word heavily, but seems semi-impervious to different types of geoengineering efforts. And the first time we installed everything in the community, we actually got real rain. And I think for folks who haven't experienced real rain since they were a kid, it's a totally different thing. And
Mhm.
it is so regenerative in a way. In that moment, I was quite sad for the fact that I hadn't felt this for 25 years. And it's such an interesting thing. And then as you use, the more orgone you use, and the more kind of how I like looking at it is sort of harmonizing with nature, then
Mhm.
you get the plants and the animals and everything starts to come back to the way this was supposed to be designed in the first place. And I think
Mhm.
in 2024, we're just so far removed from all of that that people have some faint, distant memories of when they were a kid and they forget that that's how it should still be.
Mhm. Um, so at the risk of a way to keep this conversation from not bleeding into several hours, but
Hmm.
allowing people to kind of make sense of things I would say here that are summarized.
Yeah.
Um, I always tell people, go if on my website. So I have a shop, of course. I
Yeah.
do this work. I donate a lot. My whole entire experiment is Arizona. For those who are
Hmm.
completely new to me, I moved here because I wanted to essentially continue this idea that Reich had, that deserts are not natural. And
Yeah.
they're not. It's like, imagine a desert is like a cancer. And I think that the entire earth is essentially suffering from cancer.
Yep.
Ironically or coincidentally, Reich used orgone to treat cancer patients and folks with infertility, two
Hmm.
things that are essentially an sort of an anti-life frequency. You need life energy
Right.
to thrive and live. And so, cancer, I think, is on that. Whether there's a debate now, I know, with the whole thing and the parasitic component. Well,
Hmm.
parasites are essentially stealing your life from you, or your life force as well.
Right.
So it only makes sense to me then, like, oh, okay, I'm not saying Organite will, that we're not going down that route. I'm not a doctor. But there's a lot of backstory. And again, it's a mountain of coincidences. And
Hmm.
so within even my own shop, people can write what they want about their experience with it. And some people are really thorough and really kind, but the stories that they tell, I was like, oh, this is a lot easier than me listening to them on the phone and trying to write a book. So you can see a lot of those reactions because, like you mentioned, plants.
Hmm.
A lot of people this last couple years, the word electroculture has become very popular,
Yeah.
and the idea of essentially harnessing living beings, or like harnessing the magnetic fields that things naturally have, things that are depleted because of the zapping and because of the web that's been created around us artificially. So people use things like Organite, and which is essentially, it's metals, it's
Yeah.
conductors, and it's working with, radionics or scalar type of technology. It's a wormhole, not even, it's a black hole of a conspiracy as far as what scalar is a word that actually gets used to discuss life energy or orgone.
Hmm.
Um, and I also know there's a term out there though that someone uses called scalar interferometry, which is what they say it is when you see the sky and you can see all those grill marks or what looks like indentations,
Yeah.
that's a scalar weapon that's being used. You could essentially say Organite is I would prefer to say it's maybe more of a scalar tool,
Hmm.
because it's all about the intention of it.
Right.
And people, when you talk about the rain, when people bury these earth pipes in places that have drought, um, you'll see sort of like an equilibrium happen, or it's
Mhm.
like calibrating. Because people will say like, "Oh, if I get one of those big cloud busters," and I'm going to show on while I'm doing this if you don't care.
Yeah. No. Of course.
Um, yeah, here, da 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 da. People will say like, if I get one of these, is it going to, I think you might have to share the screen, not me,
Let me see here.
while you do that. So when
Okay.
people
Yeah.
people will ask like, if I get one of these, am I going to deal with flooding?
Uh-huh.
And what I found in my research and in discussing with other people who've come long before me, who've been doing this for 20, 25 years, it doesn't cause flooding. What it actually does is, if you put things like these Organite devices, if you start busting towers or gifting Organite, and you put up a cloud buster, you bury the earth pipes, you grid all the land, if you're in a drought area, you're going to experience an increase in rain production. But if you're in a place that's being flooded and overkill with precipitation, that's going to subside and basically go the opposite direction. So of course people hear that and they think, oh no, if I do this, am I going to get a drought? It's like, no.
Right.
Essentially what these tools are doing, at least this is my best explanation of a very confusing topic that still has so many holes and variables and confusing components, because it's about the ether. But these tools appear to be helping Mother Nature do what it's supposed to do. So
Hmm.
it's like, you don't make it rain. You don't turn it like, and this is where I get a little butthurt about the silver iodide stuff. That kind of falls in my book, that falls into the limitation arena to make people think, oh, they can spray whatever. Like if you look at, actually, since the pandemic began,
Hmm.
they every day on social media you could find something feeding these ideas of what they were going to do in places like Dubai. Dubai was a poster child for this experimentation. They talked about drones, and I would post these things every so often. But I was just like, just wait for it. Just wait for it. They're going to flood. It's going to flood like crazy in Dubai, which it did this last year. And
Yeah.
everybody immediately went to giving the credit to the government. or to these physical drones. The thing
Right.
is, if when you have a lot of precipitation that's been taken. So like I'm of the mindset, and the weather is an energetic process, not a
Hmm.
physical one.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
the weather creates the conditions, and sort of like rain clouds are not just the evaporation and condensation. Otherwise, places that are humid would be raining all the time,
Right.
or that are humid and hot, and that's not always the case. And so it's that these conditions in the ether are met that essentially manifest the ability to like relocate water. And I think trees, this is an hypothesis, I guess. I can't even say it's a theory. And I think a lot of people would still agree that they're like, oh yeah, there's got to be a there there. Uh, Trees are antenna, which that we know that they're
Hmm.
antenna, but that I think what they do, since most water comes from underground, we don't get drinking water from the sky. That's a misconception too, to push climate change and scarcity. But most of this place is all water. Everything here is water, and there's no shortage of it, including clean water still to this day. But the trees, when they are in an area that's being heavily uh, stressed
Hmm.
from geoengineering or what I call terraforming, they will send out those signals that tell the into the atmosphere. Electromagnetics is just the Earth is a living creature or being or entity that is talking to itself,
Hmm.
and it's sending out these conditions, these frequencies that then get all the energy moving the way it needs to generate, take the water from the ether and relocate it everywhere within this system that we live in. And so, of course, what do you think would happen if you bulldoze the entire forest? You no longer have those receptors.
Yeah.
I've also noticed as I learned about like, I was on the Alpha Vedic podcast a couple times, and one
Hmm.
of the gentlemen on there was talking about primary water,
Hmm.
and we've gone into that because like Organite has been shown to structure water, and there's a lot of connections between the um, uh, Dr. Masaru Emoto. He's the popular one, I think, that most
Hmm.
people have heard about at some point. But basically, it's this idea that water is sort of like, it's almost like a microchip, and it has a consciousness. It can be programmed. It can hold an intention, and that there are different reactions it does, or different
Hmm.
reactions it will have based on the energy exerted on it. And what that means is you can look at it under a microscope, and you can, or a photon microscope, and see different patterns where it might crystallize when you start putting out positive energy towards it,
Yeah.
and all of the things in nature that tell it what to do, or that put out that energy,
Hmm.
that sort of aligns, and goes back to the concept of the orgone. It is the energy of the universe that is everything in alignment. It's the life energy. So when you mess it up, I mean, this is why I say geoengineering is a symptom of a bigger agenda. What that bigger agenda is controlling all of this reality
Yeah.
through the manipulation of frequency, energy, and vibration.
Yeah.
And I have found personally, I had made I've been more loud about it in the last couple of years. I have this theory that if there is ever a water shortage, your best bet would probably be to go to your local cell tower and start digging, because
Hmm.
this is a coincidence. As it gets, and this is, I have to be careful because it gets dark. They're all connected to water, because water is probably the best conduit in this realm. And when you get into the consciousness of water, there's a documentary that I would recommend if you want to understand, because it ties to all of this stuff. It's just a puzzle piece, and it's called The Secret of Water. And it is by Masaru Emoto. I think it's based on his book, Secrets of Water. And it's a minimalist but crash course in the concept of water and intention. And what I've learned, I'm kind of jumping the gun as far as
Hmm.
showing certain things, but like this right here, people probably see me play with this on my social media, but it's called a power wand, an orgone power wand. It has a certain type of crystal coil inside that it's called a Mobius coil. It's just a weird way of wrapping things and essentially you blast through these frequencies, which are emitted through the crystal and then amplified through the organite that's in this. This is probably, it doesn't look very big on camera. It's probably about 4 pounds though. I mean, it's heavy.
Mm.
Um, a power wand, I learned back in 2019 that I was listening to a gentleman named Trevor James Constable, and the subject came up of something called ether damming.
Hmm.
That means essentially damming up or building up a wall of energy within the ether, which is what a lot of these towers are doing, stopping the flow of energy. And again, not just towers, it's the phone in your pocket. And so I've learned that there are certain things you can do with power wands that sort of pop holes in that, that when you start messing around with, you essentially, you plug them into frequency generators, or you can pump through like a 15 hertz pulse. That's very
Hmm.
popular with radionics devices. But you do these certain rotations into the ether or into the jet stream. And at least for here down in Arizona, I do it towards the southwest, because everything's moving north and northeast, and
Mm.
have found that what happens is, on these days where it looks like it wants to rain and the chemtrails are going berserk, like they're trying to stop it before anything can fall, it will nudge the nature and it starts making the rain fall. Or when the rain is falling and I'll stop everything I'm doing, I'm like, I'm going to go do some ether damming. Basically, I'm going outside, I'm doing sort of my own mental meditation, I'm moving this device in a certain clockwise rotation into the ether, and you get a torrential downpour. And it's
Mm.
like, well, that's really interesting. How, like, why would that do that? And as again, like reverse engineering the idea, or reverse engineering the understanding, trying to figure out, like, why would it do this? Why would it do that? It's like, because there's a bubble of energy that is the conditions, nature's trying. It's trying
Yeah.
its best. It's always trying its best, and they're doing everything they can to shut it off. So when people hear me say short fused lectures on social media, like, you can't make it rain and you can't just stop. Well, you can technically stop it, but when you stop it, it's like, what I mean by that is, they're taking some energy from here. You got to put it somewhere. And
Right.
what happens when you're messing that up? I mean, as someone who understands physiology, start blocking parts of your body that need to flow, and what's going to happen, you're going to develop cancer somewhere else in your body.
Yeah.
So what happens is, you shut off the rain in all these places. Now that just looks like, oh, they're zapping it, they're just microwaving it. I'm like, no, they're doing something on an etheric level, and that's why then places, they want to relocate it as convenient as possible for their agenda to places like Dubai. It had to go somewhere.
Right.
And we're living in a realm at this point that is so well connected with all of this technology that, I'm at the point, I laugh at people when they say, people who say off grid, I think is goofy, because there's no such thing.
No.
So, but I'm going to click this button here if you don't mind. I want to
Yep.
show people
No, you
the
sure.
cloud busters. Okay, so essentially they're about 6 feet tall, and also for anyone interested in making one of these, because they are a labor of love, and with the cost of raw materials, copper is just through the freaking roof. So I have instructions on my website. That's been what I've been trying to do in most of the last 8 years,
Mm.
just to show people, um, how to make a lot of these things. I'm going to go ahead and do another. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, okay, cool. I want to show you an example when I mentioned the chemtrail breakdown.
Yeah, please
I
do. I
just,
think that's a cool thing for people to see.
yeah. Hopefully, can you see what looks like a movie about to start?
Yep.
Okay. So this is, let me see if some of these are better videos than others. Okay, so that's a chemtrail over my
Mhm.
house, and they just sort of become these like squiggle lines.
Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna pick a better video though, because that one's not the best. There's some that are way cooler. So like, once you start putting Organite around all the towers within a community,
Hmm.
is when you really start to notice this stuff. But watch towards the end here. It's like, this is about 30 seconds after All right, let me turn that volume down. So do you see sort of like this weird wave kind of going through there?
Yeah.
So it's like you get these weird spirals, you get these like almost like DNA helixes. And sometimes what I've noticed is like there will be two streams and then there's some weird wave going through the center of them. It's like it's just I don't know. I mean, it's why I believe it's an energy field, that it's
Yeah.
not just some chemical that's see here's okay, I think this one's better. Here's where they just get really bizarre and like where they just kind of turn into spaghetti noodles and they spin around like that. And it's like, okay, well that's and they disappear. That's the other thing. Some people who have been gifting Organite for a long time, they say that the Organite is creating a vortex that carries it up and out of the atmosphere.
Mm.
Um, but if that's true, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm gonna go ahead and stop. I'm not saying that's not true,
Yeah.
but it still leaves more questions. Um, I could have said this in the first 10 seconds of our conversation, but like I am at a point in my whole existence that I think we essentially live in Harry Potter world. Like it is
Mhm.
the equivalent of magic, that things are just not what they seem and things can be manifested or demanifested. And it gets so in the case of that stuff where it's like, well, is it disappearing? It's like, where's it going? What I think is happening is that it's like it's transmuting. It's transmuting
Yes.
something. It's like
Yep.
something's continually trying to transmute us and to transmute, it's trying to create the Borg or the hive mind, the singularity, that kind of stuff. And it's using the frequency to overshadow what I think the natural realm is. Now, again, it's such an argument now, and I hate that it's become this. Um, but if this place is a natural place, something is transmuting us and this place to be something that it's not.
Right.
And so this is sort of, it's like you're reversing that. Kind of the same way with a power wand or a cloud buster. It's like you are reestablishing the natural flow of energy that's supposed to go through there. I use the term naturally a little loosely because it's whatever was authentically happening in that location before it got bastardized, basically. So
Yeah.
you're like de-bastardizing the energy field. And I used to say, like, there were again so many cooks in the kitchen with Orgone, and there is no shortage of people selling Organite. I want to be very
Hmm.
just you have to be really careful because there's actually a term out there we use called orgonite. Organite, it needs to be heavy. You can make ornate things. I have like, I try to make like more ornate things and little charging plates and whatever, but it's a challenge because you also need to like pack metal into these things. These are made out of basically resin that holds together different types of metal components, and those metal components need to be small. So like shavings, like pencil sharpener shavings or fleck or iron filings, key shavings, that kind of thing, or metal powders. Over the years with the expansion of 5G, I'm at the point that like for my Organite, I have a recipe I use. I have stuff I put online and I have instructions and tutorials and all kinds of things. Or I have the shop for people because not everyone's going to go stock up on chemicals and copper
Hmm.
and take the time, because you need a little bit of a laboratory space or a safe space to make it because you're dealing with some until it cures, you're dealing with some fairly toxic stuff. And so there's a safety component to it, and it's not always convenient. But what I have found going on, I don't share this. Every Orgone person seems to have their own like recipe, and I have
Yeah.
found mine,
Mhm.
and I love it. But it's not just aluminum shavings or whatever. It's like there are copper components, copper metals and different magnetites and
Mhm.
even like zinc and whatever. I mean, essentially, it's almost like you're making batteries. Um, I mean, there's even I don't put uranium or anything like that. And nobody's doing anything nuclear, but I have it. But there are components. If you get into the Wilhelm Reich stuff, there are experiments he did with radioactive material,
Mhm.
and that as a geology enthusiast, At least I like to think of myself that way. There are certain specimens that I've invested in specifically that are high. They come with certificates and they have high radiation
Mhm.
readings, um, mostly for educational purposes. But that I have found devices like Organite react a certain way, and that certain things can be boosted. And there's a lot of there's some science experiments that Wilhelm Reich did specifically that I I don't really talk about it too much because I know we're focused on like what can we do about the towers, what can we do about the
Right.
EMF in our home and the smart meter, but that essentially life energy appears to be neutralizing nuclear or radiation, radioactive
Yep.
elements to where it makes that radiation essentially, quote unquote safe,
Yeah.
neutralizes it. But then also when you get into the really deep stuff with Reich and why there's a story about him being murdered by the government and
Hmm.
the same fate they all have. That some of
Hmm.
them I think are actually put out there for us to know about. Maybe she crossed the Clintons or something, or he crossed the Clintons. But the experiments he did have
Hmm.
put me on this research path that I'm like, oh, I think there's a connection actually to life energy and the energy we use to power everything in our reality.
Yeah.
And then that goes full circle back to what is this parasitic thing that appears to be using us in order for its own survival, basically. And it's again, it gets weird, it gets deep, it's kind of dark.
Yeah.
Um, and but the whole thing is like when you look at everything in terms of energy, you see the mechanism, what it is that operates this place, and why everything is the way it is, why decisions are what they are, why resets may be happening, and
Yeah.
what caused them, what was left from them, what where we're going right now. There is no doubt in my mind that the next 4 years are purely about life energy and the soul, or whatever people want to say, the spirit, the sovereign spirit of people, or what, everyone's got a different name for it, but essentially it is like the God spark that is you as a human being in a just this physical, this is just an organic, we're just organic robots. I mean,
Yeah.
we're organic machines
Hmm.
that house a energy,
Hmm.
and that energy is what seems to be attacked. And that's again one of those things that like you reverse engineer the why of why is this going on, why are they doing this, and you realize, oh, it's not just about controlling the food supply or poisoning the water.
Yeah.
And you see like, oh, why did the Canadian forest last year catch fire? Well, they burned so much of Canada in 2023. And then, people in Miami were complaining that smoke was lingering all the way down there because everyone looks at everything physically.
Right.
Well, smoke is just charged particles that go into that whole ionization effect. That when you
Hmm.
have an entire web, you can manipulate the elements in that whole bubble wherever that smoke goes. You can start like think of teleportation basically. I know it's a kind of like, wait, what? But it's you're relocating. Like when people think like, why is there smoke here in a
Right.
completely different part of the world and everything in between was empty? You didn't hear from people in, well, I never did, but people in Georgia or South Carolina or
Right.
places as you got closer to Canada. I'm like, why Florida? And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, because it puts out that fear program. Like, oh, it must be climate change and it must be super severe. And it's like, no, it's they put up all the parameters, or they blow up a factory and they get all that extra crap in the air, and then they electrify the hell out of it. So
Mhm.
when we find aluminum and things like that, I mean, again, for those who would want to die on the hill of the aluminum, barium, and strontium and
Right.
argue with me, I'm not denying that those types of things have happened. The government will never miss an opportunity to try and kill you, so don't worry. But but there is something deeper going on that, at least as far as what we see in the sky, that is really manipulating this bigger component and the ether, that those two things are not the same.
Yeah.
And when I think about, people will say, well, they changed the formula from jet fuel back in whatever. And I'm like, oh, interesting. What government entity told you that?
Mm.
But it's possible, yes, they put something in the fuel And then I think, but why do that when they could put the same entities that run and operate all this stuff anyway? Why not just put it in the fuel you're driving around in your car every day?
Right.
Why not put it in what, it's like, and when you blast things, you get in, when you do this stuff with energy, you get into alchemy. And
Hmm.
alchemy is where you can start creating things like gold out of mercury. And you're like, well, those are two completely different elements. So I think about when we find certain things in the soil and we think about we know there's the microwaving component, the blasting and the killing off vegetation.
Hmm.
And a lot of forests, they don't even have to bulldoze them. It seems like the trees are kind of dying. They blame a bug or a beetle. I
Yeah.
don't think that stuff's true. That's again the physical, like it's a
Right.
frequency that's killing the realm. And
Hmm.
I think that those elements, there are so many elements out there. There are so many chemical cocktails that have been applied to our every essence of our existence since the beginning of time.
Hmm.
And so when you start playing with alchemy, it's like, what are they changing? Maybe they change iron into aluminum, or they change something into something else that's already in the soil. And you're like, oh, the soil, they took everything good and they depleted the soil by essentially changing it into something that it now no longer is. It's
Hmm.
it's a big web, and I know it's out there, but when you look at everything as energy and manipulation of it, and then you look at that there is this like etheric dimension that is the overshadow of this place that helps manipulate the physical elements in this place, then it's like, okay, you can at least answer more questions than with the simple, here's what the government said and it came out the back of a plane.
Yeah.
So it's just think bigger. That's my point.
Yeah, and to your point where you said earlier, I think on individual level, how I've come to start to conceptualize things, in quote unquote alternative medicine spheres, everyone's worried about parasites and molds and different bacterias and stuff. But I think those are a secondary knock-on effect from losing our life force. And so this concerted effort to change our environment to basically parasitically suck our life force, well, then nature, to your point before, nature is going to try and solve the problem somehow. So
Hmm.
then we get parasites and molds and all these things, and everyone said, well, that's the secret to your problem. But they're still wearing an Apple Watch, they still talk on their phone, they still sit in front of the Wi-Fi, and they do all those things. So that's why I really wanted to have this conversation with you today, because realizing that the environment is basically sort of sucking our life force, but there's something we can do about it. Like there's
Hmm.
tangible things we can do about it. And I think some people, the whole EMF crew with the little meters and everything, they're going to say, well, when I put orgone in, it doesn't do anything to the EMF readings or whatever. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So popular question. Well, I'll first do yours and then the question that's tied
Sure.
to it. So Organite, when you put it around things, immediately it won't turn off your Wi-Fi. I mean,
Right.
I would be terrified to fly an airplane over the state of Arizona, having been here myself. Things would fall out of the sky, and the world would be in worse havoc if it cut off that
Yeah.
signal. It's that by exploring the energy component, it's not the Wi-Fi that's the problem. It's that the
Mhm.
Wi-Fi it's creating an entire realm that is the problem. There's something piggybacking on it. And that's the part that like why the government's always there so quickly. I mean, there is no shortage of information about EMF being dangerous, living under power lines is dangerous,
Mhm.
and having something pumped out the back of an airplane. Because then your frame of reference to what this universe is or what this reality is limited to the physical boogeyman who's doing something to
Right.
you, and now you just need to buy another sticker to slap onto your phone or move out into the country. I'll live out in the middle of nowhere. I can assure you, doing the work I do, I've been in enough forests at the tops of mountains and out in the middle of nowhere. And Arizona is essentially the military's playground as far as doing crazy shit experiments and hiding stuff in the desert. So there's no shortage of that stuff. And again, there's no off grid. It's that this thing is creating a web,
Mhm.
but people ask, this is the question, very popular question. They will say, if I put this in my home, if I put this around my Wi-Fi router, will this affect the signal? Will my phone still work? Will my computer still work? And the short answer, 8 years ago, I'd have said, yes, you're fine. 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have said yes, and I'd probably hesitate. And now I would say, because I wasn't giving them the whole story, now I would say, short answer is yes, you will still have your phone. It will be fine as far as your connectivity. However, you're going to notice things changing. And the reason they're changing, and they're going to be changing for the worse as far as the signals, is
Mhm.
because there is a pathway or a gateway, which that's a key word because everyone's routers are called gateways for a reason,
Mhm.
that this energy field goes on the fritz when you put Organite around.
Right.
And if you look at it like AI, like I look at AI as a sentient but not conscious thing.
Mhm.
I ideally think like the end game, if someone said, what do you think is the point of all this that's happening to the world? I'd say the singularity, unity, consciousness, which is why I don't like the new age, because it's just the
Right.
same new world order with crystals and extra steps. But the singularity is the end goal. So you
Mhm.
reverse engineer that. How would you get there? So I did a video after the hurricane stuff, which might have been what prompted you to reach out to me last
It
month when we
was, yeah.
first talked.
Yeah.
So there's a video I highly recommend it. I'm very proud of this video. It's long for some people. It's 13, I think it's like 13 minutes or something, which is not long to me, but it's someone had asked me, why do you think the Appalachian area was hit so bad? This was the first week of the hurricanes when Hurricane Helene had hit.
Mhm.
And I had seen so much information going up that I felt was incorrect, that was not addressing the real problem. Everybody was, of course, showing this blue infographic that shows all the NEXRAD towers. Like, oh, look at all the Doppler radar on this screen. And people watching this or
Right.
hearing this, there's infographics or videos you've probably seen that show a map of the United States and these weird little blue blotches that are blinking. There's a backstory to that stuff and why it is actually released to the public and why those concepts run rampant. So I thought I'm going to make this video that talks a little bit using footage I've covered in a progression over the years
Mhm.
and telling my story on how all of this is happening because of the frequency fence. And not only that, it's not just about like another cell tower here and a cell tower there, but that if you look at your technology, we are daily at this point, we are being slow killed and slow nudged with a moving goalpost to
Mhm.
update our technology. We
Mhm.
use all these apps that have to be updated. Well, there's a frequency change that occurs there. It's like I started paying attention probably around like 2019, that the number of times to have to update like the iOS, and people
Right.
they'll always say like, oh, see, now the physical component is they blame planned obsolescence. Oh, they just want to sell more phones.
Mhm.
No. This video that I did specifically addressed how there is this evolutionary process with us, regardless of who put us here, why we're here, and who our bad guy is. But there is this bizarre and um, magical thing about us that is essentially becoming better as you get left alone. If you get left alone, nature will heal itself. If they
Mhm.
stopped doing everything tomorrow,
Yeah.
everything that's in alignment with itself would start to like help itself, repair itself. The earth is essentially constantly cleaning itself, but there
Mhm.
are entities here that work quadruple, octuple overtime to destroy it. So it has a hard time keeping up. Well, that process comes to us as far as like competing with us and that evolutionary process. It comes in the form of updates. And then you do so many updates and boom, now you've got to get new devices. Well, now you've got new devices. You need new towers outside. Well, now you've got all these towers outside. You start messing up the weather even worse and doing all these manipulation things. You
Mhm.
start manipulating the minds. You start manipulating the collective mindset. You start pushing an agenda and an idea. And now all of a sudden, everyone's driving Tesla vehicles that are cell towers on wheels that are
Right.
then lather, rinse, repeat. And it's like what's happening now is we've gotten to the point that the simple little jitterbug slider phone for a senior citizen has now progressed to everyone's going to have a Neuralink. And I know everyone probably watching this is going to say, well, not me, I'll never do it. We'll see. I mean, what good to each their own, but I know plenty of people who said I won't get a shot that got a shot, or I won't
Right.
wear a mask that they it's like you have to, yeah, we're probably going to be faced with I say probably, but okay, we're going to be faced with challenges.
Mm.
And that progression in that video, I talk about why a lot of people in the last year, many watching this probably have experienced this as well, that they've seen fewer chemtrails for at least a few months.
Yeah.
This happened in 2020 as well. It happened in March and April in 2020. It got pinned on the airlines not being as operational once the
Mm.
lockdowns started.
Yeah, I
If
remember.
it wasn't that, it was because, well, like right now, the reasoning behind it I heard, and which also prompted my video, was that Donald Trump and the white hats of QAnon had taken out the chemtrail pilots. I For people that
Okay.
want a taste of my sarcasm and my wit, because these are everything I do is like it's dark topics. So
Hmm.
go to my website and I try to poke fun and make light of conversations. Like my frequently asked questions page, I get a lot of commentary from it that people are pleasantly surprised, and they laugh because it's like
Hmm.
I'm subtle as a gun when it comes to that stuff. But in the case of the QAnon thing and all of these components prompted me to make this video to highlight the progression, and how if you look at it again, it goes back to the energy of this place and the life energy of this place, and something acting as a parasite to consume it. It's like, imagine that there is something in the world or in your existence that it needs you, but you don't need it.
Right.
And that's what you're up against. That's what we're all up against. And so, but I highly recommend it. It's on my YouTube page, and I think it's on my homepage of my website too. And I know that'll probably be in show notes, or we'll
Yeah, I'll
flash it or
put it in
whatever.
the
But
show
for
notes.
any
Yeah.
for anyone listening, it's it's the orgonedonor.com, and that's Orgone is spelled Orgone, not organ, orgonedonor.com. So the orgonedonor.com. But the video on there, you'll see it. It's about the hurricanes in the Appalachian region, but it's really more about the frequency fence
Yeah.
using what happened in October. And so and in that video, I think it was before Milton was even announced, I had talked about, like, and if you want to look at some tangible things and sort of like get a better grasp on, like, well, what are they doing to manipulate the energy that then manipulates the realm? Look at something trivial like politics. I know we talked on the phone about Orange Man bad getting to be. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what your political beliefs are,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
whatever
No.
they are.
Yeah.
I just always say Orange Man bad. I just don't care.
Yeah.
But
No.
I had made a comment to you. I said, and I said this in the video that I did, that in regards to Trump or Kamala, it didn't matter who was going to win. But my prediction, and I don't like to really make predictions with that
Right.
stuff, but I wanted to show why I would make that prediction if I was a betting man.
Mhm.
And it was that I thought Trump would win,
Mhm.
because I think even at the end of this month, who knows if it's progressed, but I said, I heard he was supposed to be sentenced. Now, this was a month and a half ago I made the video. And so I thought, okay, I was like, well, they need to generate energy and they need to generate misery. And I'm thinking, how can you do that? Well, you can have more of the same. I always say, like, if you go to the left, you get the New World Order today. And if you go towards the right and vote right, you'll get the New World Order tomorrow, but with extra steps. Because you have to at least give the illusion that you care about freedom,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
And I'm a recovered liberal. If anyone wants to think I'm picking a side, no, I've gotten away from. I don't participate because I don't consent to the system.
Right.
But the idea of generating energy is that this parasitic thing is going to utilize whatever is going to generate the maximum amount of energy from its food source, us, or biological life. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, you can go with her and be one and done and it's more of the same, or you can go with him where you make everyone on one side rejoice and be super happy. But then something we had said this before, maybe I'm not convinced until January and someone's sworn in. I'm not convinced that this is over. Something
Mhm.
doesn't smell right to me.
Yeah.
Uh, and if that's the case, my justification for it is you would be swapping out something and changing it back or going a different route. Basically, getting people, what is it, out of left field. Something would come out of left
Yeah.
field.
Yeah.
And so you can tell I played baseball.
Mhm.
So it comes out of left field, and then you flip that yin and that yang,
Mhm.
kind of like a battery and polarization and positive and negative charges. And
Mhm.
so now you've got the other side would be rejoicing, and then the other side is going to be sad and going ballistic and upset. It's like, how do you get polarization? And it's the weirdest anomaly because I hear people talk about division all the time, and we know that they want division.
Mhm.
But in a weird way, the end result is still singularity. They just want the singularity of what it wants everyone to believe and to be and to think. Kind of, if you look at it like goo pods in the Matrix movie, it's essentially like that. Everyone asleep and just thinking the same exact thing as everyone else, the hive mind. And
Mhm.
so yeah, it's an anomaly because there is so much division. But then people are like, "Oh, they want us to fight." I'm like, "No, they don't." Just like they want us to die. I'm like, "No, they don't. They need you." Like
Right.
it's not about killing. None of this is about killing and death. It's not about wanting you dead. It's about wanting you dying. They're not
Mhm.
the same thing. So that everything about you is such a low vibration
Yeah.
that becomes that food source.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I mean, even to that point is just when all of these things designed to steal our life force, sure, there's health implications to that and all of these things, but every single person I've talked to, regardless of how if they believe in politics, how they lean or whatever, but everyone has commented, my goodness, everyone seems to be dumb now. And it's just this sort of collective dullness that seems to have settled in, coinciding with a hyperpolarity between everything.
Hmm.
And so my sense of that is they're using all of that to sort of charge up for something.
Hmm.
That's all
Yeah,
in
there's
design.
when I hear phrases like calm before the storm, you kind
Hmm.
of need one for the other.
Yeah.
Um, you like when I don't see trails in the sky or, people, again, so many emails a day that people tell me their life story, they air their grievances and talk about everything or send videos and whatnot.
Hmm.
And sometimes I get videos where they're like, "Where have they been? What's going on?" And we joke about things like saying they're understaffed. There aren't enough chemtrail
Right.
people. In that video I did, I specifically stated, and it was the whole basis of making it, was that it's completely irrelevant whether or not you see chemtrails in the sky.
Hmm.
The weather I'm using the word anomaly, but really I mean destruction.
Yeah.
The weather anomalies and the weird things going on in the sky, like hurricanes, are probably, I mean, I'm using probably and I shouldn't, going to progress as
Hmm.
long as this web progresses.
Hmm.
And I get very nervous around the Christmas season because it is the gift giving season and about a trillion new EMF devices, smart home devices, all this stuff that's made under the illusion of, it's upgrade time for everything. And people are really concerned about 5G towers. I'm more concerned about a new housing development that, I mean, my parents, in the last like 5 or 6 years, they built a new house.
Hmm.
And I was disgusted at watching how they built, because my parents, when I was a little kid, had built a house. I'm like, wow, they don't build these things the same. And even
Right.
then in the 90s, they didn't, they were already crap, but, or going downhill is what I mean. Sorry. But they're now retrofit with everything
Hmm.
for the future, for more of the LED. Like people don't even realize like something as simple, and I put this in the video,
Yeah.
LED lighting, it magnifies and connects to the Wi-Fi network. So it's
Yeah.
like when you ask the question about, affecting the Wi-Fi and whatever, it's like you'll notice things go on the fritz as more time goes by, and especially if you don't keep upgrading your technology,
Hmm.
um, you will. And I'm my stuff's on life support because I refuse. I'm doing everything I can to refuse updating and
Yeah.
upgrading, and I still have an older phone, and we turn, we unplug, we turn everything off, we tether, we wire stuff. I always recommend you shouldn't have Wi-Fi on in the house, and I break that rule too. But
Hmm.
whenever possible, especially when you're sleeping, everything should be powered off and away and dead.
Yeah.
So that stuff will react. And I made a comment in the video about uh, pay attention on days when it's like super hot, where the sunlight's hot. And it's
Hmm.
like I mentioned when it was like barfing out solar flares or what seems to be high solar activity. And there's videos all over the internet. You can find out when something's going on. You don't have to go to NASA and have them tell
Hmm.
you. And so what I've found is these consistencies that when the sun is at its most intense, when it's intense and windy and like it can be cold outside, but you step in the sun and it almost burns your skin.
Hmm.
Those days, the internet always goes out. The phone reception is just complete garbage.
Hmm.
And, I've noticed even around here where I live, like power lines kind of start, like things start sparking and transformers blow up and all of the stuff in this grid. It gives me like a sense of hope or like a funny sense of hope, just that like there might be this divine something that sort of like if this place is natural and has been overtaken, I almost kind of wish for a cataclysmic event. And people will hear about the Carrington event, and I don't know enough about it to really speak too much. Just that there was an electrical event that a lot of things exploded, like the telegraphs caught fire,
Hmm.
and radios blew up, and there was this whole idea that like there was a solar flare or solar charge, or the Earth could have done it, an EMP type of event.
Hmm.
And so it's yeah, it's hard to tell with what's going on. I wouldn't even know if something were to happen like that. I'd be like, is this natural, or is this happening from something else?
Right.
Because at this point there's so much technology covering this realm that people are fixated on space lasers, and
Hmm.
I'm just kind of like, they can jump a fire from house to house to house, or microwave within a bubble, or manipulate the elements. They can manipulate the metal. They can melt the car into the ground. They can vaporize. I mean, all the stuff when you get into like, even all the towers, and I forget her name, Judy, what's her name? But there's a there when it comes to frequency weapons,
Hmm.
and they're not, but I don't think they're coming from a plane that they just happen to show you, that one plane with the giant bottlenose thing on the front, like, oh look,
Right.
they're lasers, lasers, lasers. I'm like, or what if they manipulate the water? Because again, we're structuring water. They
Hmm.
could manipulate the water in the atmosphere. They could create a magnifying glass effect with the sun. And maybe
Hmm.
that's why the sun on certain days burns you badly before you can actually get any benefits, or like you say, changes the frequency waves so we're not getting this beneficial stuff. We're just
Right.
getting the intense crap.
Yeah.
And I just think like, oh, you could make your own little solar death ray basically out of using the cell towers perched on top of mountains and the phone in everyone's pocket.
Yeah.
So there's always a bigger explanation that doesn't get the credit it deserves. It's
Hmm.
usually like space lasers this, or powder in the sky. I always wonder about the chemtrail thing. I just feel like we would be completely coated in white stuff.
Right.
Um, but it's really weird. And actually, this is a side note for anyone interested, something to look for. I've noticed now for the last probably about 2 years that on really crystal clear blue sky days, it's easier to see when the sun, middle of the day when the sun is out,
Mhm.
and because of how the light hits. But on really clear blue sky days, I will always see webs, little webs, what looks like spider webs, things falling from the sky and hanging on
Mhm.
trees and all that weird stuff. And I know, so like there's a component, and we hear about nanos, we hear about maybe they're creating antenna, it's the Borg, whatever. I think it's even deeper than that, and it's coming in and out of whatever realm that it's coming out of. but it's always on clear days. There's nothing being sprayed in the sky. There's
Yeah.
nothing being done to the, and this could even be like, if I don't notice it on a blue sky day today, well, today is not a like, it is blue, but there's crap, because last quarter moon. But on the, I can have like 2 or 3 days in a row, and there might not be anything that first day, but it's
Mhm.
just like, where's this coming from? And I don't know the answer. But when I get on my tangents about why I'm like, can we stop just going with the easy route we're being told so easily?
Yeah.
It's because it does that, those directions, they don't answer what's actually happening. They just
Correct.
leave more things unanswered. So we just never even get around to discussing the conversation openly. So,
Yeah, and I think for so much of this stuff to work, what had to happen is they basically had to rewrite our understanding of everything around us, and that's been going on for a very, very long time, and trap us in this materialistic view of things,
mhm,
because that's not how everything was taught for, a lot of written history, and then all of a sudden it was in the 1900s. So I'm been trying so hard to encourage folks to kind of move beyond sort of this materialist understanding, one for their own health, but then just to look around at the environment around them. And I think orgone is sort of a perfect avenue into that understanding. And what I just always encourage people, especially folks who are like, I don't know, this seems a little weird. I'm like, just get some and try it. Just get some, try it, and then just observe what happens. And I guarantee you, the clouds above you and the plants around you will change. And just be mindful of that. And you don't have to understand why, but I've never seen them change for the worse, I'll tell you that much.
mhm. Yeah, it's when I started doing this, I was in Chicago, and
Mhm.
which is an EMF soup.
Right.
I now live just outside of Sedona in a small, most of the people here, it's like a retirement community.
Hmm.
There's one tower in town. I can assure there's more Oregonite in Sedona, Arizona than anywhere on earth. Um, but and we get pretty good weather, pretty good skies. When I started doing this, and I said earlier, like, I came here because, like, well, Wilhelm Reich came here in, I think, like the late 40s and or mid 40s, and he wanted to prove that deserts were not natural. And now he was down closer to Tucson, but when I left the city, and we left the city also because we just knew something was on the horizon. Something was coming someday. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know it would be COVID, but we just knew,
Right.
we knew enough in the conspiracy circuit. I'm like, I don't want to be in a high population. Um, and at least at that moment. Uh, so I came here and we started gifting, and this was in November of 2018.
Hmm.
We meaning me and a counterpart that is so removed, I don't ever like, there are parts of my personal life we keep away, for obvious reasons, but there is another person in my life that is essentially helping me to the best of their ability. But most of, if I'm the one who makes it, sets up the when we're going to go gifting, and the one who deals
Hmm.
with all this stuff. It's like they're there for moral support. But when we travel around, and we would load up the car, we go find a place in Arizona that we wanted to spend the day or maybe spend the weekend. And I always joke that people have to pick up what I'm putting down here, but I say we take out a bunch of Organite, we lose it in a boating accident, and then we don't come home with it. And so do with that as you want. And there's a reason we say that. There's a reason we also say the term Organite gifting. Gifting means it's a gift. It's a gift to the earth. You have left it somewhere, and it has to come out of someone's pocket.
Right.
And so, being the very determined person I am, and wanting to prove, again, setting out to prove this wrong, or just be like, there's got to be a better explanation to this. And I'm like, I'm going to be the better explanation of this.
Hmm.
And now I've never been more lost than I am today. But we set out to do this stuff. We put up chem busters. I started meeting people and trying to put up. I've so far to date, I've put up about 60 cloud busters, or we call them chem busters. Those are
Hmm.
the big copper ones. I've put about 60 of those around the state of Arizona,
Wow.
and that's not to discourage people from saying, like, well, I could never do that, because they are a fortune. I mean, I have no responsibilities except myself, and I fund this entirely out of my own pocket,
Mhm.
um, because I am a pissant, who's determined. And so we got here, we started doing this stuff, and it was within just a month that it was New Year's Eve of December 2018. If you live in Arizona, if you live in Flagstaff or Sedona or anywhere in the valley, um, you might remember New Year's Eve. We here, so nobody here owns a snow shovel, or very few people own a snow shovel, because you might get an inch or two. That's the average per year. And the
Mhm.
year we moved here and started gifting, we got 15 inches on New Year's Eve. And then about a month and a half later in February, we got about 18.
Wow.
Lake Mead was over capacity that year.
Mhm.
Our governor had declared the drought over by May, and the Snowball ski resort up the hill in Flagstaff, I think they had like 48 inches of snow one day. They had the longest ski season in the history of Arizona, in the history of at least their existence here.
Yeah, yeah.
And our temperatures were also record cold. I think Phoenix, for the first time in several years, because of all the excess rain, had allowed fireworks for the 4th of July.
Mhm.
Um, so there was this huge shift all of a sudden, and we were making really good progress where we would find these pockets. And anytime I meet someone, I mean, I have sort of like a revolving door, where people pass through town. I live in a touristy area, so
Yeah.
I have met hundreds, if not thousands, of people at this point who have probably met up with me here or visited my place of existence. And I always send people off with stuff. I'm like, oh, you're going hiking. Oh, you're going camping. Oh, you're going to venture to wherever. Or it's like, here's some gifts. Take the.
Yeah.
And so there's people helping, or I might give a talk to a group. And so that collectively, all of this stuff was making a lot of progress. But then in 2020, we got locked down. Well, limited. We just had limited mobility. It was a pain in the butt to get anywhere for a while. I won't say we were locked, but the coincidence was that all of the progress we made was kind of starting to slow down.
Mhm.
And there was a reason for that. And this was at the time I was getting so many emails a day from parents who were freaking out, saying that, oh, my kids, they are going back to school, and look what just appeared on top of the school. And it's like another tower. All
Yeah.
these things that were built there. I mean, it was a rough year mentally, because I had to teach myself to, care but not carry.
Mhm.
And having that exposure to so many people's walks of life, I was like, oh my God, we're screwed. So towards the end of 2020 and into 2021, I started a project. And I was like, I'm just going to go full throttle with this. I'm like, fuck money. Who cares? It's just money. And I decided to start I call it Earth Pipes Across Arizona. And Earth Pipes are organ devices. It's a bunch of organite shoved into a copper pipe
Yep.
that has crystals wrapped in coils inside. Can you see? Yeah.
Yep.
And they get buried in the ground. And these, my first experience burying these was actually around a nuclear power plant back near Chicago, when it ripped a bunch of holes in the sky on a chemtrail day, and like the sun like literally came out within 5 seconds. And it was like my first real experience. This was in 2016. My first real experience with using earth pipes and what they're doing in the ground, and starting to dissect what's going on in the energy grids below us. And again, when I said that thing about cell towers and water, and what's all the water underground and being a conduit, like there's a wormhole there for conspiracy theories and research. So, um, but anyway, I started my project Earth Pipes Across Arizona, and I was like, God willing, I'm going to put earth pipes all across the state of Arizona. And throughout that year of 2021 and into 2022, we, with the help of some friends and some really unlikely people you would never like, when you do this kind of stuff, it's amazing what gravitates to you. And of course,
Yeah.
like attracts like, and it's sort of like that manifestation thing. I don't want to get too much into that, but I made some good connections, and I had some great resources of help,
Mhm.
and we did exactly what I set out to do. And by middle of 2021, I think I'd put like at least a few thousand of these around. And
Hmm.
we actually focused more on going into that jet stream where I then eventually would start I'm doing all these ether damming experiments,
Yeah.
but hitting all these high intensity EMF spots and working with individuals where like I might be introduced to a farmer. And I'm like, oh, sir, your farm has X number of towers. You're in this valley. You're on this water. You're in this part of the forest. You're in the, you start dissecting it and you're like, okay,
Mhm.
here's what I'd like your help with. And here's what I can do for you. And so, and it was essentially, it was an unpaid 80-hour a week job in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I ran myself ragged, but 2021 and 2022, we had the two highest monsoon seasons on record. So it
Man.
started to have the shift, and it got colder actually. And when I
Mhm.
say colder, I mean like the summers were very mild. They never miss an opportunity to tell you if it's hot. The news
Right.
had to do everything it could to avoid trying to draw attention to the fact that we made it almost to July without a 100-degree day.
Wow.
And I'm talking about for Phoenix. That's a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
deal.
That's a huge deal.
So, I mean, because we like right now and at night, I think it gets down to like the 30s here and probably the
Mhm.
higher 40s there. But yeah, and for people that also are not around here, it's really hard to combat this. They always want you to know how hot it is, but it has progressively gotten colder and colder and colder that they've had to change what an extreme temperature is. Extreme temperature no longer means 125. Then in 2021, I think they tried to change it to like 113. Now they're changing it to 101. I'm like, well, 101 in an area that's incredibly dry and like no humidity
Yeah.
feels like other places that are 80 degrees or 85 degrees at
Right.
most when with humidity. So like I don't turn the air on until it hits close to 100 because it's just not necessary. So there were changes like that, and I've only noticed again in the last 6 months that it's it's a never end is there's just so much work to do
Hmm.
because when people come to me and they say, hey, I want to get something for my house, what do I do? It's like I'll usually, I try to feel the water and like figure out where they live, what's their situation, like do you have neighbors who love their tech toys and have charging stations outside and dirty electricity all over the place, and it's like what are they embracing because you can't control what they're doing.
Right.
And so I'm getting to the point where I kind of tell people, I told someone just before hopping on this call, they were like, I was going to do this, but I feel like I need to do extra. And is there a problem with that? And I'm like, no, because like I'd probably bury one more earth pipe around your house on a different side and, focus on like, there are ways to utilize this stuff that's strategic. And that's really been
Mhm.
my whole mantra here is to do it in a strategic way, to have a controlled experiment to the best of my ability anyway. And it's had its ups and downs, but for people that want to know, like the reason I call myself the Orgone donor is that it's like what I'm essentially donating. I mean, I put free shit in boxes all the time for people who buy stuff, but I am focused on Arizona because I'll get messages from someone maybe in Ibiza who will be like, "Excuse me, can I?" And I'm like, or in New Zealand even, or maybe just Washington D.C. I don't know, whatever, Florida, and it's like, well, my point is to do it in a strategic way that is maintaining a control group really
Yes.
to be able to say, because really I want to take, and this goes back to that new age thing I said, it gets lumped into all of that stuff, and I'm like, there's just such a deep web here. Just applying our regular normal laws of physics and trying to decode what this is doing. Because back in the day people would say, well, like they say, what is it exactly doing? And it's like, well, we've got this idea of this pushing and pulling that it sucks in, Organite sucks in an energy field. And then I'm going to just hold up for the sake of visual aids, but like
Yeah.
this is a little fancier looking thing, but all of these are different metals, and it's pretty heavy. But it's like pulling in this thing and spitting out a new thing. So it's that transmute process.
Right.
But I know that there's definitely more than that. It's just that the secrets of the ether is like the one thing we're not privileged to such a high level of information But then we go find things like pyramids that are actually built literally like Organite or orgone generators.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, interesting. Why is this here? Who built it? What's going on? Why did they disappear? What
Mhm.
was their agenda if they had one? And, and so it's like, it's just a never ending web. And so at the very least, my goal is to maintain as much control over my own experiment. And so I continue with my Earth Pipe project. And, if you live in Arizona and you're listening to this, I'm not going to feed your whole family, but I would love for you to contact me because this stuff it's a fortune. It really
Yeah.
is. And that's the downside. Copper's not cheap and it's composite resin, which is based on oil, which is the second or I mean, it's expensive. So for people that live in Arizona, though, that want to help, and I mean genuinely help, not just people, because I get 100 emails a day from people. They're like, if you have any extras, like send them my way, I'll do it. And I'm like, they live in Timbuktu that has nothing to do with anything. And I'm like,
Right.
you gotta you gotta put something like there has to be an energy exchange,
Mhm.
not just me siphoned and bleeding myself to death. So I try to find a happy balance with that in my experiment here in Arizona so that I have a visual aid and a reference point in the library I've put together on my website for other people to say, okay, there's a there. And Mitch has been nothing but pleasantly surprised this whole time. He's been trying to prove something wrong for 8 years. So,
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think what's always struck me so incredibly deep is the fact that you just recognize that something's going on. You thought you had a tool, and you're like, well, I'm going to do something. And I think it's so easy for people now to just be like, ah, it's too crazy. I'm too scared. I don't want to do it. And just so throw their hands up and do it. And I think what you're doing in Arizona is absolutely incredible. And I hope it inspires a whole bunch of other people to sort of take this upon themselves. And the cool thing is I've met a couple young guys and girls sort of all over the country that are have watched your videos and watched other Orgone folks, and they're kind of doing it in their own community, making their own stuff, kind of and just sort of building this out. So to bring light to all of this and sort of inspire other folks to kind of take control of these things, I think is incredible.
mhm. Yeah. And I mean, the best advice I would give to people too, because it is overwhelming or it can be
Yeah, of
overwhelming and
course.
it's very difficult to convey things sometimes without having those dark undertones and so
Mhm.
we avoid it or we try to bypass. But I would just say like either I my philosophy is I'm either going to fix the ship, and if I can't fix the ship, I'm going to go down with it, doing every last damn thing I can because I'm like because otherwise I'm like what am I doing here?
Right,
And
exactly.
so I'm playing my part to do what I can that for
Mhm.
some reason I was told like I've this is what I'm supposed to be doing at
Mhm.
least at this part of my life and unless I get some intuitive understanding of complete understanding that I'm supposed to be doing something else. It's like I just want to do the most I can with the time I have.
Yeah.
And it's also fun to just screw up. I mean, like you can have fun with it. And so I recommend like you start small. Don't
Mhm.
let it get overwhelming.
Mhm.
You start at your home and you and your community, and you will quickly realize how not alone. I mean, we're alone, we're all alone, but like you'll
Mhm.
realize how not alone you are in a weird way that people who truly want to help you will gravitate to you
Right.
and so will parasites. You have to be very careful
Oh,
about
of
that.
course.
But
Yeah.
your discernment, your discernment and your intuition, everything will be heightened,
Hmm.
and you'll figure it out. But yeah, just you start small, and it's just like I'm gonna just do the best I can, and
Yeah.
work your way outward. And um, but a couple, and I know I'm running out your clock here.
No,
Just
good.
but the best pieces of advice that I can think to give right now
Hmm.
would be, of course, start small. Secondly, this is an endeavor that it's weird in itself because it's something you do alone, but yet everyone does it together. So you have to be very careful. And I have a video about tower busting or organite gifting. It's called Tower Busting 101. That's all on all anything I say, it's going to be on my website. But in that video, I tried to emphasize that there will come a time where some people might want you to participate in things or do things, or you think they want to help. This is something you have to do yourself, or that you only do it with someone you would trust with your life,
Hmm.
and that you know better, if not better than they know themselves. You're the next in line for knowing them.
Yeah.
And so you want to be careful, and that people should be able to figure out what I'm getting at with that.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's like start small, use discernment, intuition, and common sense.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, then what was the other thing? Oh, just utilize some of the things like that we talked about today. Like I have so many videos that are videos specifically about topics we covered today.
Yeah.
And so it's impossible to get through all of them. There are hundreds of hours worth of podcast interviews, and now we'll add this one to the list. So it's like there is a tone, and I try to explain what each video is with a
Hmm.
little description that kind of helps. Like some people, it's really overwhelming. It might want them to start at a freshman level, and I did an interview specifically on that without dumbing it down or making people, it's not a pissing contest for
Right.
consciousness.
Yeah.
But then there's others that are like, all right, dude, let's get weird. And we went into it that way. And, sometimes those ones are more fun or humorous,
Hmm.
but there's something for everyone to find, like, what can you do to
Yeah.
this thing that's happening all around us, that I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where we all talk more openly about the etheric side or the
Mhm.
energetic frequency side. We'll hear no shortage of people talking about frequency, raise your vibe.
Right.
That's common sense.
Yeah.
But the deeper stuff. And so, whether we do or we don't, um, just I recommend go to my website and look at those tools, because it's a rabbit hole. And the more you learn, the less you know. And after 8 years, there's not a day that goes by I don't learn something new.
Hmm.
Even just today, and trying to figure out, the past, the present, and the future, because it's like, oh, this whole entire time, it's always been about energy, not the physical.
Yeah. No, that's amazing, Mitch. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time. And
Yeah.
and like you said, there's so much to this, and I think the important thing and the where some of the, I guess, truther community falls on their face a little bit is we have to understand the basics, and by that I mean you have to understand kind of where we're at and our sort of general understanding. And then admit that this isn't just a material thing, and then ask better questions on that side. Because what I see happen is people just they don't have a firm understanding, or they're not willing to admit they don't know exactly what's going on. And then they
Hmm.
just pick up all of these weird random things that just dilute the waters of understanding. And they just get further and further away from actually an etheric understanding of sort of how all of this works to begin with. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate you kind of trying to collect all of this together in a meaningful way.
It's my pleasure. I would say too, just to anybody that's
Mhm.
never be afraid to just not know the answer.
Right.
It's like it's sometimes, I mean, and really, like, to say you don't, if you don't know, and there are some things we may never, that can be scary. We may never know what is actually going on up there or down there or out there, but it's better to have that approach that, okay, I'm going to learn to be comfortable with that until I know more, um, and be okay with that, than to be touting off. I mean, then to have a misunderstanding or a disunderstanding of
Hmm.
something, and then you run, because once you run with that and you start going forking into the road this way, oh, it must be this, and then you're like, oh, this way. Next thing you know, you're like, wow, we're 5 years into what I call the COVID timeline, and I feel like we need to pump the brakes, reverse, go back to 2019, and start over. Because I'm like, it's just because so many people are not comfortable with just saying, no, you know what, like, I was wrong,
Hmm.
there's more to this, or I
Hmm.
simply do not comprehend, I don't understand, or I don't know.
Right.
And I don't like not knowing, because that can be a terrifying feeling, but it's like it's just something that, I think it takes a strong person to not to admit that they don't know, but
Mhm.
at least you're trying. So it's like think bigger, and just keep in mind the more you learn, the less you know.
Oh yeah, of course.
So
That has been the frustrating journey of my life. So thank you for being a part of it. Um,
definitely.
where can folks find you? I know Orgone Donor, theorgonedonor.com.
Mhm.
What's your YouTube channel?
Um, what is it? I've neglected it, and I found out I
Okay,
had I had
that's
followers.
okay.
I think it's under if you type in the Orgone donor,
Okay.
um, it'll come up on there. And I try my best to avoid algorithms, certain things, labels. So like
Yep.
all if you see on YouTube, I post all my videos, but then I will embed them on my website where
Mhm.
I put all the descriptions. So any
Okay.
content about my stuff is only where I can control. And then you don't get
Perfect.
all those Wikipedia things plastered on it. It's like I'll just type in gibberish or whatever, but it'll
Right.
say, yeah. So definitely check out the YouTube.
Okay.
To anyone, please check out that video on the hurricanes and the frequency fence,
Yes.
as well as my one on the cloud busters from Pi Day. That was from March of this year.
Yep.
And then if you find me on social media where I do the summarized versions of blog posts and things like that,
Mhm.
um, I am currently set on private, or I end up with just so much robotics. I can't keep up with like just really bad just fake accounts and bots and that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So
Yep.
it is on private, and so I just tell people like I go through the list, I'll approve whatever as long as I can prove that you're a human. Because if
Yeah.
so, like 0 followers, completely hidden, no other way for me. Like, because I'll usually look people up. Do they have a Facebook? Do they have this?
Mhm.
Most of the time, but if after 5 minutes I can't figure out if you actually exist, then I might not approve it. So just send me a message. That's my point. Just
Cool.
say I'm a human. Tell me a joke because AI doesn't have a sense of humor,
Right.
and that's the one thing it'll never. I don't think it'll ever be able to crack is wit and the sense of humor. So that's just say whatever, and then I'll be like, all right, you're in, you're
Yeah.
in.
Perfect. Well, thank
So
you so much, Mitch. I
yeah,
sincerely appreciate it.
you bet. My pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.